Okay, we're live. Are we live? Yes, we are live. Okay, Mark's giving me the thumbs up there. So guys, thank you very much for joining us for this Lunch and Learn webinar. We're calling them Lunch and Learns now because they're generally on at about 12 o'clock on pandemics and the property market. So just before we get right into the guts of everything with both Doug and Simon, who are standing by here, you can wave to everyone if you like. Yep. We're about to go live on Facebook as well, so I'll just wait till I get the word before I officially welcome everyone in. All right, well, I think we're nearly live on Facebook. So the topic of today's webinar is pandemics and property. So it has been roughly 3 weeks since the government shut down all non-essential services, put a temporary ban on traditional auctions and open homes, and essentially halted the economy in response to COVID-19. So today, my two guests, we're going to be talking about the impact of this on the property market and what the outlook looks like for the next 3 to 6 to 12 months. So a couple of housekeeping things first. If you are on the webinar and you would like to ask a question of Simon or Doug, please put your questions in the comments box. If you happen to be on Facebook and you're watching this, hello Facebook, I think we're live. No, it's still preparing. If you happen to be on Facebook or if you're watching it on the replay, you can put questions in the comments and I'll attempt to get them answered. Elite Agent, we are still keeping a live updated page on COVID-19 issues at eliteagent.com/COVID-19. So if there's anything that you're looking for or any questions that you've got about COVID-19, head straight to that page and we will attempt to get them answered for you. So a little bit on my two guests for today. So Simon Pressley is the Managing Director of Propertyology. He's a 3-time Buyer's Agent of the Year and one of only 4 individuals who have been inducted into the REIA Hall of Fame. And Doug Driscoll is very familiar to Elite Agent readers, I think. He's been on the podcast and all sorts of things before, and the CEO of Starr Partners. So welcome to you both. Welcome Simon and welcome Doug.
Hi, Sam.
So interesting times we are living in at the moment. And first of all, I think everybody knows Doug Driscoll and knows Starr Partners. So Simon, I might just get you to give a little bit of an overview first of Propertyology and what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. In a nutshell, we're buyers agents and market analysts combined. Our target market is the everyday Aussie mum and dad property investor. So how we do that, it's, I guess, to use an analogy, it's what a share investor, how they might use a stockbroker. They reach out to us and we sort of point them in a particular part of Australia to invest in. So we're literally analysing markets all over Australia every day. And once we've recommended a town or city, we then get our hands dirty and help them buy the right property.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doug, can you tell us a bit about Starr Partners and stuff, just for the maybe 1 or 2 people in Australia that don't know who you are?
I will, but firstly, I must say, Simon, you're like a helicopter pilot with those headphones. I love them. I need to get myself a pair. Yeah, for those that don't know Starr Partners, we're a real estate group in New South Wales. We have 28 offices. The usual remit: sales, property management, commercial, and strata. And like every real estate business up and down the country, obviously we're finding the current crisis very, very challenging, and trying to figure out ways to navigate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're keen to hear a bit more about that because, you know, obviously, Doug, you're considered a thought leader in the industry, and there are people that are very keen to know how you think this is going to play out, and you know, what's in store for us for the next 3 to 6 months. But I might just go to Simon first, because Simon, you just wrote an interesting article for us about pandemics and property. And in all of the numeric studies that you've done on various localities and various markets in Australia, you've also done some studies on what happened post-GFC, what happened post-SARS, what happened post the 1991 recession. So first of all, tell me about what are the major factors that influence the property market?
Yes, I describe a property market of an individual town or city as like a big jigsaw puzzle, and there's lots of individual pieces. Believe me, there's a lot more to what drives a property market than population growth, for example. Like a lot of people might think it's the most important thing. It's a combination of housing affordability. It's a combination of the volume of supply in a market and the things that affect the construction sector, because ultimately they dictate supply. It's credit policy. before we buy the asset. We need to buy the liability, so that has a big influence on property markets. And it's local economic conditions. This sort of catches a lot of people out, because I guess the economic stuff for a lot of property people, they don't have an interest in that, or they consider it to be boring. Or when economic stuff is reported, it's usually at a big helicopter level about Australia as a whole. But Australia is really made up of approximately 190 individual towns and cities that have a population of 10,000 people or more. So each of those local economies are doing very different things at different times.
Yeah, interesting. And so in the article that you wrote last week, you talked about, how property always leads a recovery. So
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit to the people on the webinar about what your thinking is there?
Yes, and so this is based on the historical evidence of past crisis. The recession, for example, which was 1991, and the GFC, which is 2008. We looked at what actually happened in a 3-year block of time from the start of that crisis and then the 2 subsequent years. And in both cases, 8 out of 8 capital cities, the median house price grew in value. And in some cases grew quite significantly. You're talking, 25 to 30% growth in a 3-year period of time. So that's nearly boom proportions. And then when we get outside of the capital cities and look at different regional locations in all states and territories, most of those also produce price growth. Now, no two crises are the same, including this one. But one thing I think is the same, no matter what the cause is of a crisis, is humans always respond. When we're in the start of the crisis, like we are all now, there's always a lot of emotion, especially when this particular crisis, when so many daily pleasures are being taken away from us. And it's hard for a lot of people to think beyond the current mood. But as soon as things get safe, there's an economic response, whether it's federal government, state government, local council, or big business. They all want to get on with what their core responsibility is. And that's to improve lifestyles and grow an economy. So it's hard for people to think like that right now. All they're hearing about with the economy is unemployment rates are going to be high and we'll have a recession. I agree with that, but I also believe we're going to have a very strong response, and property markets will bounce quickly and strongly.
Yeah. Doug, how are things from a Starr Partners perspective? Like, what are you seeing on the ground at the moment with your guys, and how are they feeling about what's happening out there at the moment?
Well, in a more general sense, this is feeling very much like a really shitty episode of Black Mirror, isn't it? It's very lifelike. But in regards to the nuts and bolts of our agency, they're just adapting. That's all they can do. Obviously, they can't control the uncontrollables, and they're just getting used to and betting into the new norm. So obviously there's various directives that have come from the top we have to respect and abide by, but generally, to give you a sense of scale and context, our listing numbers as a group now are down about 65 to 70%, and that's a year-on-year comparison, the same period, of course, last year. The sales volumes are down pretty much 50% now. The investor numbers that we are seeing have dropped by pretty much half. Actual buyer numbers have dropped by pretty much half, which, by the way, isn't a problem, of course, because the people we are now dealing with are certainly not tire kickers. They're people that are motivated to move. And then obviously we have the rental crisis, of course. And at this moment in time, approximately 5% of our tenants have come to us for some sort of rent relief. So they're the kind of numbers. But in terms of our agents, they've just had to mobilise themselves and adapt to the new environment. Really, quite frankly, they don't have a choice. It's sink or swim.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it is very interesting, because in the beginning of this crisis, we were looking at the news pretty much daily, and the news was all no good. Like, they were restricting us more and more and more, and everyone was getting very down about it. And now what we're seeing is that there has been a definite flattening of the curve. This morning, Gladys even said, maybe kids will be going back to school soon in different stages. Australia's leading the way in detection and testing and things like that, or so they tell us anyway. That's what I'm led to believe from the Australian, which I believe. So Simon, how long do you think this is going to go on for realistically? Like, we're getting glimmers of good news and we want to believe it, but how long is it going to go on for?
Oh, geez. I'm no scientist. There is a science to property markets, but I'm not a medical scientist. I don't know. What I've found encouraging, Sam, is there's definitely been a change in dialogue, I think, from all politicians and our medical experts over the last sort of 7 to 10 days. And they're the ones that I'll be guided by. The broader mainstream media, I think it's very dangerous to be paying too much attention there because they're caught up in emotion as well. But those who are in the know, and not that they absolutely know everything because they don't control the virus either, but there's definitely a change of dialogue there. I think that we're going to have a progressive relaxation of a lot of this social distancing stuff. Now, what they relax first, I don't know, but I don't expect it's going to open overnight. But we do seem to be, I like to think, outside the worst of it.
Yeah. So, like, this pandemic is quite different, isn't it? Because of, oh, you've got a dog behind you. How cute! come in to listen in. So this pandemic is quite different. So the GFC, well, to the GFC, let's say, because, you know, like I was talking to Andrew Bell last week, and that'll be out on the podcast on the weekend. But basically, everyone came in Monday morning, and everything had gone to hell, let's say. You know, property prices were falling and things like that. But this pandemic is different in that the support from the government kind of changes that a little bit. Simon, do you want to comment on how this pandemic is different?
Yeah, so the GFC was actually caused by credit. It was, you know, the big American banks had been reckless the way they'd lend it out, and, you know, globally, credit markets had tightened up, and how that affects property markets is, as I said before we buy the asset, we have to buy the liability. So the GFC was an economic shock, and this is not an economic shock. In fact, Australia's economic fundamentals, fortunately, were very healthy as we approach this crisis. We're one of very few developed countries in the world, Sam, where we actually had a budget, that was balanced. Not many big countries around the world had that. And our federal government's debt was a low 20%. Again, it's a lot lower than a lot of other countries around the world. So what that means is, to attack this virus, and we're all forced, things are taken away from us and forced into our cocoons, the governments have the economic arsenal to provide all these support programs to avoid, otherwise most people would be literally on the dole queue and may take many years to get out of that. So that's where we're very different. The other thing that's different, this crisis compared to, say, the GFC, housing supply in Australia had been expanding in the lead up to the GFC. Building approval volumes, had been growing and growing month after month. This particular crisis, the 2 years leading into COVID-19, building approval volumes had been getting significantly lower and lower and lower. So we entered this crisis with very tight housing supply right across the nation. The other thing is, the 2 years leading up to this crisis, property markets had been largely underwhelming. Whereas when we entered the GFC, property markets had been largely strong for a long period of time. So if there is such a thing as a good time for a virus such as this to close markets down, I think we've got it, and it will help us get out of it much better.
That's the most positive thing I've heard about this virus in 3 weeks. Doug, what about you? What do you think is going to happen with property prices coming up over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, the first thing, I'd echo very much what Simon said in terms of maintaining a positive outlook. I mean, I think the Australian economy is the envy of the developed world. But one thing we've got to be careful of is, when we talk about a GFC, that was an economic downturn, not a recession. Now, a lot of the sensible money at the moment is suggesting that we will go into a recession. And I think the fundamentals are, it depends on how deep that recession is as to the damage, obviously, that it causes on the market. Obviously, things like unemployment clearly are a massive driver there. I worked in the UK in 07, 08 and into 09, and that left a very indelible mark on me, I can assure you. To give you some indication, again, by way of context, property prices in Australia during the GFC period dropped by about 8%. In the likes of the UK, they dropped by about 24, 25%. Now, I'm not for 1 second suggesting that that's what's going to happen here due to this crisis, but I think with all these things, we've got to compare apples with apples. So in regards to how quickly we rebound and bounce back from this, it really depends on how deep any form of economic downturn or recession tends to be. Because if it's a deep recession and unemployment plummets to 10, 12, 15%, then we could be in some serious trouble. If we maintain unemployment rates and the healthy GDP, then I personally believe it will bounce back from this quite quickly. The other thing around this is you be very careful who you listen to. Listening to Simon there, clearly he knows his onions, he's done his homework. But I was joking with someone only last week. Everyone is either now a virologist or an economist. The problem, however, of course, is guess what? They got their PhD from the University of Facebook. So we've got to be really, really careful on who we listen to on this. But as to how it plays out, honestly, your guess is as good as mine. It's very, very difficult. But if I was a gambling man, I would suggest that we'll come out of this probably within 3 to 4 months. We will see property prices come back slightly, but I personally believe that we are looking at a V-curve situation.
Yeah, so just interestingly, on the weekend, obviously I picked up the Sunday telly, and there was an article in there which they quoted you, Doug, on that, it was likely we could be facing, we could see a lot more transactions coming out of this because everyone in close proximity with one another, we might be looking at a couple of the Ds like divorces and things like that, which would be a sad outcome of this pandemic. But do you think that coming out of it, that there will be definitely people sort of going, this space is too small for me, I need to leave?
Yeah, definitely. Look, again, if we get through this and get to the other side relatively unscathed, there are so many economic and fiscal stimulus policies and packages in place, not just of the back of or contingent to this crisis, but they were already there in the first place, of course. So, record low interest rates. I actually think that we could come back from this quite aggressively. And we could actually see a fairly high volume of listings, which is something that we've lacked, certainly in the Sydney market now for several years. Again, market drivers, as Simon alluded to earlier, are very different depending on different marketplaces. But it's undeniable that one of the very few sectors of industry and commerce that can do well out of this whole thing is obviously divorce lawyers, sadly. But that'll have a ripple effect to real estate agents. And of course, one of the other Ds is that of debt. There'll be some people who won't get out of this quite as lucky, and they'll be forced into a position where they may need to sell their property. But again, in regards to the real estate market, well, that's not the worst thing in the world, of course, as well. But again, it's all speculation, it's all guesswork. But the good news, I guess, is that we're all feeling now a little bit more positive about this. We know what the beast looks like. And I think that certainly helps. And I think that everyone is certainly now, from my perspective, certainly from my own group and my general circle, far more optimistic we're going to get through this and probably do so quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of questions that have come in that I might just give to you guys while we're chatting away. So, and so this is the first one is, has the lack of buyer numbers been matched by the lack of supply, therefore prices should remain the same? I might go to Simon for that one. What do you think about that one?
Yes, it's a good question, and the answer obviously will be different slightly from location to location, but broadly, yes. Let's not forget that it was only about a month ago before this dreaded germ hit our shores, and large parts of Australia were running at double-digit price growth. I'll say that again. Large parts of Australia were running at double-digit price growth, and two main reasons why that was occurring. We had very low property listings right throughout Australia. I'm sure Doug will vouch for that as well. Agents just did not have enough stock to sell, and we had strong buyer activity because we had about 6 months of several interest rate cuts, and credit had been relaxed again. So they're important things to remember now, whilst we've got this enormous frustration and emotion associated with being locked up. But when they start to unlock us, the very low listings that we had will be even lower. Some of those vendors have already taken their property off the market. The buyers will be the ones who'll come out first, and that will force prices quite rapidly, I believe, because there'd just be so little volume of properties to choose from. The germ hasn't made interest rates rise. The germ has not made credit all of a sudden hard to get. Our banks are actually really cashed up and are in behind the federal government to cushion us through this. So that's why I think it's going to be a strong bounce back for property prices. I don't think we're going to see lots of forced sales, largely because we've got low interest rates and we've got empathetic banks. And it's not often we can say that about banks, but they've been very empathetic cushion people through this period of isolation.
Can I just add to that, actually, Sam? Simon makes a great point, because who would have thought it, lo and behold, that our greedy banks actually in this situation could end up being our saviour? Again,
Yep.
there's reference to the GFC and what caused that. That was banks obviously selling subprime mortgages overseas. And working in the UK at the time, people like the Royal Bank of Scotland were bailed out to the tune of, I think, £9 billion at that moment in time. Obviously, the difference here is that our big four banks anyway have huge cash reserves. So the GFC was referred to in the UK as a credit crunch, because that's exactly what it was. We're not going to see the same thing here, because the banks, as I say, they're very liquid at the moment, and there's no obvious early signs of them obviously closing the net in on people. And long may that continue. And if it does, then we will definitely get through the other side of this. There's no question about it.
Yeah, Simon, did you want to add something to that? Did I? No? Yes?
No, just I was saying earlier that all crises are different, but I think out of all crises, people learn things. And the thing that we learned from the GFC, when I say we, the entire world learned, was the importance of having really strong banks. Without them, you do not have an economy, no matter which country you're talking about. So worldwide, banks were forced to build up their capital reserves. And, the GFC 12 years ago, that's a long period of time for banks, and they were forced by APRA to really increase their capital reserves. So that's going to become very, very important for getting not just Australia, but countries worldwide through this.
It's funny how last year the banks were kind of persona non grata through the Royal Commission, and now they're everybody's best friends. Yeah.
Ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. You just, you never know when you're on the, like Heidi Klum says, in fashion, one day you're in, the next day you're out. It's similar. But got another question also for Simon. In WA, 2020 finally started in a positive way, and then COVID-19 hit. Where do you see prices in WA in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, well, the germ really hasn't changed the fundamentals broadly. I think our mining sector, well, it's one of the few sectors that is, largely open for business still at the moment. And there's no reason to think that that's not going to continue for quite some time yet. Who knows? Not only is the Australian federal government going to need to stimulate things once we get out of our cocoons, but worldwide, every government's going to do that. Now, if China does that, and they've got a lot of capital reserves as well, they've got a lot more money than Australia. If they stimulate their economy and they start building cities again, which they've done before, I'm not predicting this, but I would not be surprised if the world sees another mining boom led by China. Hard to think like that with what's going on today, but fast forward, 6, 12 months' time, you never know. Now, if that happens, Western Australia and Queensland property markets, they typically respond very, very strongly to that.
Doug, did you want to add anything to that one?
That is, of course, if we continue to trade with China in the same way.
They'll always need our iron ore, our gas, and our coal.
That's true. That's true. I think Sam, just in regards to, it was Mark Twain that said that prediction is difficult, especially when it involves the future. So I think one of my pieces of advice for agents is don't concern yourself with what the future may or may not look like, and the question I would pose on this is, and I often do this to a lot of people in our group, is, are you market driven or are you marketing driven? Because at the moment, there's too many agents that are kind of at the mercy of all this. And I appreciate it affects all of us. Of course it does. But are you market driven or are you marketing driven? Because good agents are just getting on with it. And that's all you can do. I often say that you can't control the wind, but you can control the sail. So, of course, we all hope for the best. But it's a bit like a cricketer. If you think about it, the analogy I'd use is, you literally just a batsman plays each ball as it comes. They don't start thinking about the next over, whether it's going to be spin or fast or seam bowl or whatever. You just need to play each ball as it comes. And that's the way I look at this. It's almost each day as it comes. But you can't control the uncontrollable. So you just kind of need to get on with it and be marketing driven, not market driven. Because 2-3 years ago, there was a case of a high tide floats all boats. Our whole industry was kind of walking around with a swagger, so to speak. But I think for me, it's just about doing your best to control your own destiny, knuckling down, getting back to basics, all the stuff we hear time and time again. But talking about it and doing it are two altogether different things, of course.
Yeah. So, Doug, I guess this question's a good question for you. So we're heading into winter now. I did feel the first bite of cold in Sydney this morning, coming down to the office early. And winter traditionally is a bit of a slower time because we do a little bit of hibernating anyway. What do you see as the essential ingredients that agents need to put in place now to enable their businesses to survive and then thrive coming out the other end into spring, let's say?
Well, I think there's two answers to that. One is a kind of a business owner's perspective, and one is that of an agent. I'll answer it based on the agent. We are in a connection economy. You know, the irony of this situation is we're all told to kind of keep as far apart and disconnected from each other as possible. In a metaphoric sense, we need to be able to connect with more people than we ever have done before. You know, actually pick up the phone, communicate with people, whether it be FaceTime, Zoom, whatever it may be, and actually add value where you can, because people will appreciate you connecting and reaching out to them at this moment in time. Also, let's not work on the basis of assumptions. You know, we really need to get down to the nitty gritty. The nitty gritty being, of course, people's motivation to look to buy or to sell. We need to start asking these questions, pose hypotheticals where applicable. So for me, as I said, let's not just resign ourselves to our fate. Let's create our own future, and let's start reaching out to people and connecting with as many people as possible. Because when this changes and when we get through this, which we will, the person that's made the most connections and added the most value will be the one that wins. So it really is 101. It's getting back to basics. I'd love to give you some sort of secret sauce, some sort of formula. Well, there it is. It's as simple as that, in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting. And Simon, what about some of the good agents that you work with? Because, you know, like as a buyer's agent, you would work with a lot of listing agents out there. So what are some of those guys doing at the moment? Good ones.
Yeah, I'd echo what Doug's saying. You know, a lot of this stuff isn't rocket science. You know, it's unprecedented times, but buying and selling property doesn't change because of a virus. If I was a selling agent, and you know, hand up in the air, I've never sold a property before, but if I had, what I would be doing would be having meaningful relationships with anyone I've ever met before, buyers and sellers. And I wouldn't be applying any pressure about you should be buying or you should be selling. I would just be asking how they are, how their family is. You know, I'd be going through my notes and what do I know about that person? What do they do? What are their interests? What are their children's names? And I'd be having meaningful conversations just about that. Because at some point in time, those same people are going to be looking to either buy and sell, and they will appreciate a phone call that you did not need to make just to inquire, how are you?
Because you could have found that information out now.
And don't forget, real estate is second only to sport, really, in conversations amongst the population. So as long as you've got something meaningful to say, and as long as you kind of know what you're talking about and can be tangible and articulate in what you say, people actually, believe it or not, will appreciate hearing from you, because everyone's kind of thinking it at the moment, you know. And the problem now is that a lot of people are getting their information from the wrong sources, the likes of social media. One of the best things about social media is it gives everyone a voice. One of the worst things about social media is it gives everyone a voice. So, you know, you may as well obviously just put it on the line, be candid, tell people what's happening, and let them make their own judgment and mind up as to these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a couple more questions here, but I'll just call for the people on the webinar. If you've got a question for Simon or Doug, can you pop it in the question box or the comments box now, just to make sure that we get them answered? Look, one that came in earlier today, and we kind of dealt with it, but I just want to ask it as a straight question. So we have seen a flattening of the coronavirus curve, or the germ curve, as you've been calling it, Simon. I like that. I'm going to steal that, actually. I'm just going to call it the germ from now on. So Robert was saying, I was reading a few articles today that suggest while we are flattening the curve for corona, we are at the very start of the economic downturn curve, and we're heading for some serious pain in the next 6 to 12 months. What are your thoughts on how Australia will recover from this? How long do you think it will take? And will the property market tank? There you go, quote unquote. So with that, you smile first, Simon, so I'm going to go with you.
Look, I only see a tank if what we've experienced for the last month, if it's just as tight as this for, you know, well beyond six months, heading closer to 12 months. If that happens, the whole world is in a mess. But there's no reason, I think, for anyone to think that way, given the data that we can all see each day, given the commentary that our political leaders and medical leaders are saying each day. There's no reason for us to think that way. So therefore, I don't think that way. we are going to see, I think it's very plausible that Australia will enter a technical recession. And we will experience very high unemployment rates. But what's important for the public is when they hear that is to not be surprised by it and understand the cause of that. We are dealing with the germ, and the medical professionals said the best way to deal with the germ is to stop moving around. So when you stop moving around, you don't use goods and services, you don't spend money, you don't make money. So therefore, economy cannot expand if we're doing what we're told to do. So it should not surprise people when we do hear, I think, in a few months' time, we're now in a technical recession. All a recession means is we've had 2 consecutive quarters as a nation where the economy didn't grow. Think of it as a business profit and loss statement that had 6 months where it was red ink in the net profit instead of black ink. That does not make the fundamentals of the business poor. It means it had a lean period of time. Think of Australia's economy like that. Yes, the unemployment rate will go high, but a lot of businesses, I know one majority of businesses will reopen. Not everyone will, but a majority of them will. And we have the economic arsenal to kick the economy along once we squash the germ.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I did about an hour ago in preparation for this chat was I looked back at my own predictions and that of other so-called experts. And in fact, you ran some of them in November last year. And who would have thought in the 6 months thereafter that we would have had, obviously, the whole country catch fire, floods, disease rampantly run through it. We're just waiting on the plague of locusts. And, I think for me, what that says is that a lot can change, but that can be for the better and for the worse. And I even actually went back and looked at some of these so-called experts' views only a month ago. And the good news is a lot of them are actually wrong, so that kind of apocalyptic or Armageddon sort of scenario doesn't look like it's going to come to pass. And as Simon said, we've got to be really careful here in terms of obviously over-egging the omelette. The technical definition of recession is as he's outlined. But again, that doesn't mean then that the third quarter, we don't then start seeing positive growth. So I think it's unavoidable somewhat that we're not going to go into recession. But by certainly the start of next year, we could be in a far better, far healthier place. And as I said, take what you read with a pinch of salt. Even like the Grattan Institute yesterday released some data saying that unemployment rates may end up spiraling to kind of 20% plus of the nation. I just can't see a world where that's possible. And if it is, as I said, the whole world is in meltdown. But as I said, we just need to take a lot of what we read and hear with a pinch of salt, because ultimately good news doesn't sell newspapers. Good news doesn't drive website clicks. Bad news does. But we can't become consumed by that, because otherwise it affects our mood, our daily behaviours, our attitude, and thus the kind of dialogue and vocabulary we're using with potential sellers. So we've just got to be really, really mindful to, as I said, separate and actually cut out all of the noise, because we can all make a stab in the dark as to what the future looks like, all of us. That's not to say it's right, as I said, and the future is a very difficult thing to predict. And just as quick as it can change for the worse, it can obviously change back for the better as well.
Yeah, well, that's right. I can remember at the beginning of the year, we were all looking like, we had that year of 2 halves last year. And at the beginning of this year, we're all sort of saying, oof, thank God that's over. And then all of a sudden this hits. So, I'm not in the business of predicting anymore either. But
it's very self-prophesizing. Going through the financial crisis in 07, 08, I actually think that we as a population in the UK at the time talked ourselves into a worse recession than needs be. Whereas one of the things I'm seeing now is the early signs of resilience. You're seeing that good old-fashioned Australian spirit coming through. And that's definitely going to see us all through these challenging times.
Yeah. Look, the media is an interesting
If I may, Sam, I'd like to...
Sorry.
If I made this statistic, I'd like to share with people to add some confidence to the discussion. So we hear GDP. That's, I guess, the term for Australia's economic growth. 100 years ago, we had World War I, shortly followed by the Spanish flu. Then we had World War II. Then we've had a recession. Then we've had a GFC. That's Australia's crisis, the main ones over the last 100 years. Every single situation, the 3 years immediately after each of those 4 major events, including 2 world wars, Australia's GDP grew by in excess of 6%. When they were in the moment, though, how do you think the general public felt? Do you think they were overwhelmingly positive? I'd suggest that they'd be saying the same sort of things back then as they are today. Oh dear, recession, we're never going to recover from this. Unemployment rates are going to go through the roof. Well, guess what? They not only recovered from those big crises, they bounced out of them really strongly, and we'll do it again here.
Mm.
Yeah, interesting.
Here, Sam. Sorry to interrupt again. I'm of that view. The sun will rise from the east tomorrow. I'm pretty sure of that. And actually, just to add some more numbers to that, since the financial crisis in 08-09, the Sydney property market, the median property price grew by about 105%. That's not a bad bull run. So, yeah, history sometimes can be a great teacher.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, when Simon and I were talking when we were talking about this webinar last week, Simon, you also sort of said that the government will do everything that they possibly can to stimulate the economy, even if we do go into a recession. I guess maybe for the people, like, you know, because this was something we were talking about last week, can you tell us what your thoughts are on that and how far the government will go to make sure that the property market is solid? Yeah,
that's right. Well, again, because every state government and the federal government, once their focus, you know, is allowed to move away from the health crisis, understandably, their focus will be on rebooting the economy. Now, the single biggest common denominator for 25.5 million Australians is the house that we live in, or the apartment that we live in. So this is why in past crises, stimulus has always started with the property market, whether it's grants to help first home buyers, whether it's incentives to help people invest, whether it's the RBA, you know, doing things with interest rates. Property markets are always stimulated first, because when you do that, you have a positive influence on 25.5 million people. And I'm exceptionally confident that that's what we'll see again. We don't know what that exactly will look like, but I'm exceptionally confident that we will see stimulus for the property sector as soon as this germ gets squashed.
Yeah, so it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is look after the people's homes first, and then everything else tends to follow. Because if I know that my home's stable and is going to be there and not going to lose value, then I'm happy to go to the pub on a Friday night, or, you know, go shopping, or whatever it happens to be.
If we have confidence in the value of our asset, then our mood when we get out of bed each day, we start the day with a positive mindset. And that then flows through to if we're a business owner, whether we're capable of thinking of employing or not, or whether we're a private consumer, how much money we do or do not spend, or whether we're comfortable enough to go and borrow money, whether it's to buy property or anything like that. It all starts with how do we feel when we get out of bed each day. And if we're waking up worried about the value of our property asset tanking, there's a massive knock-on effect for as soon as we open that front door.
Yeah. And Doug?
No, you just mentioned going to the pub on Friday night. That's the only bit I heard. Sorry.
Oh, right. Okay.
That first beer back in the pub's going to taste amazing, isn't it? Eh?
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of us that just aren't going to take stuff for granted anymore. Like, you know, even if it's just the simple things in life, like, you know, having people in your office. Like, I've been here alone for, you know, much of it. Thankfully, my husband's here looking after me. But yeah, there you go. But you know, it is definitely the little things. But okay, a couple more questions from the crew. So and these are about the media, interestingly, and I've got my own thoughts on the media. Like, you know, like, isn't the old expression, if it bleeds, lead?
Yep.
Like, you know, so
yep.
You know, and this is what's different about a lead agent, is we try not to do that. But the question is, market sentiment will most likely guide the future direction. When do you think the media will change its attitude? Doug, I'll go with you first, because you are the media man.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, as I alluded to earlier, it's quite a difficult one in respect that ultimately the media now is a very negative place. It can be quite a toxic place. But I think when we start to see some good news, I think in this instance the media will absolutely shout from the rooftops about it. And I think we're so led in terms of our beliefs and our attitude by a lot of whether it be mainstream media or social media dictates to us. But I think we're all looking out just for some good news, almost a morsel of hope in that regard. And I think in all of this, yes, the media have sensationalized and they have kind of scaremonger to an extent, but I don't actually think they've been as irresponsible as they could have been, because I don't think they understand the size and gravity of this issue. So as soon as there's a small bit of good news, even Simon said earlier about opening beaches again, when they start to mobilize workforces and send them back into the office, I think there'll be a collective cheer. And I think it'll be actually the media that will lead that. That may be silly of me to think, but I'm pretty confident. Talking to a lot of journalists at the moment, as I do, they're desperate for this to change, because the difference between, I suppose, something like this and a lot of other stories is that this affects, as Simon said earlier, 25.5 million Australians. We are all in this together. Whereas when there's other crises, it typically just affects a relatively small percentage of the populace. So I think from this point of view, as and when we see some good news, I think we're going to see that spread all over the newspapers, online, and I think there's going to be a collective cheer.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, my advice would be too, is to spend like some time looking at the news, like allocate some time to look at the news once a day, because you're going to need to know what's happening to be able to update your team or your community or something like that. But don't go in and out of the news all day, because that'll just do your head in. And even I've sort of come to time blocking the bits that I'm updating myself, because it is depressing. I mean, seeing Sandra Sully with viruses behind her every single day, even when she's talking about something else, is depressing. So, so that would be my thoughts, to kind of stay out of it. Sorry, one more. It's interesting that the news tells us how many infections we have, but no talk about the net infections, considering over 50% have recovered. Yeah, it wouldn't make a good headline, would it?
Absolutely.
No, and I think where the media maybe have been irresponsible was talking about the kind of the deaths, the mortality rate. It's humans' lives we're talking about here, loved ones, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, and I think we just got to be mindful of that. We're all kind of doing it, aren't we? Almost on a daily basis, going, oh, there's another one gone, there's another one gone. Again, this is people's lives. But the fact of the matter is we're starting to see the curve flatten now. I think there were 3 states only yesterday which reported no new cases. And look, we're far from the end of this. But as I said, we are now starting to see a glimmer of hope. There is a very faint light at the end of the tunnel. And I, for one, am very firmly looking in that direction, because that's all you can do. One foot in front of the other.
Absolutely. Simon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, listen to the leaders at the end of the day. I think they've collectively done a sensational job. Australia's been put up on a pedestal worldwide with how we've handled this, so they deserve credit. And they've got a good record with how they've managed this so far. So continue to listen to them. They're already talking. I think there's a cabinet meeting today, and the federal cabinet, I believe, are talking about how to get out of this and which part of isolation will be relaxed first. So Australians should be positive that they're having that discussion, because 3 weeks ago they were discussing the reverse. Which bit do we close down next? So, and when they announce, however, they're going to relax it, let's do what they say. If we get reckless, we'll be forced back into our cocoons again. So when they do say we're going to relax some things, I'm hoping it's sport. Back to the media question, the buggers have got nothing to write about at the moment. Would it be fantastic if we had some sport to actually watch and to talk about? Yeah. But whatever it is, let's respect what they say. We're still going to need to keep our distance and wash our hands and that sort of stuff for several months yet. And if we do that, the cooping up that we've had doesn't need to last any longer than is necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just call for last questions for you guys on the webinar, and I'll just ask one last one of my own to you both while we just see if there's anything more coming in. What about investors at the moment? What sort of immediate future do you see for investors with rental returns and or opportunities coming up? So I'll go to Simon first.
Yeah, okay. Well, as I said earlier, the housing supply in most parts of Australia is actually really tight. And that's a very, very important fundamental for a property investor is, no matter which part of the country you're contemplating investing in, be confident that there's not an oversupply situation. So that's a really good thing. Your profit and loss statement, the biggest expense in that will always be your interest expense. There's not a single person alive today that has seen lower interest rates than here and now. We described as early as Christmas time. The report's still on Propertyology's website now that says this is the best fundamentals that Australian real estate has seen in 12 years. That was only a few months ago. So most of those fundamentals are still the same. Now, this is a significant event, the coronavirus, but most of the things when we're talking about fundamentals are still the same. Housing supply is incredibly tight. Credit is available again. Credit is very, very cheap. Those things don't change because of a germ.
Yeah. So a couple of last questions come in. This one I think is for Simon from Kate. How do you see the Hobart market faring amongst this?
Interesting. Hobart's been officially Australia's strongest market the last 5 years by a record streak. I think Hobart was sort of coming towards the end of its growth cycle before this anyway, but its last quarter of last year was a really strong quarter. It does have a bit higher reliance on tourism than some other capital cities, but so does the likes of Darwin and Canberra, and tourism is going to be the industry hardest hit by that. But I think domestic tourism, that has the potential to actually boom in the coming sort of couple of years because we're all sick of being home. So as soon as we're told that we can have a holiday again, I reckon, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm going to be holidaying. So, Tasmania certainly will benefit from that. Housing supply is incredibly tight in Tassie. So I think it will get out of it better than what a couple of people are saying. About 80% of properties in Hobart are owned by locals. It does have a low interstate interest in Tasmania, which makes it a very resilient market. So I think it'll be okay.
Okay. And how fast do you think international investment will come back? I might throw this one at Doug first. What do you think about international investors right now?
Well, when we're looking at international investors, the vast majority over the last probably 5 to 7 years have come out of mainland China. Now, the Australian government and the economy welcomed that, albeit that there was a couple of extra hurdles put in place. The major obstacle for mainland Chinese investors, of course, is actually getting the money out of China. So the government over there have made it ridiculously difficult, so much so that if you exceed the limits, you actually will face quite severe fines and or incarceration. So you won't see as much money coming out of mainland China as you once did. And that's not because of what the Australian government did, that's because of the Chinese government. Where I do anticipate we'll start seeing more money, though, is coming out of places like the subcontinent, so places like India, which obviously is a behemoth in its own right and very much an emerging economy. And they're now starting to look outside the confines of their own borders at great investment opportunities. And for them, Australia is very much, dare I say, the land of milk and honey in regards to investment, because it's tried, it's tested, and it's proven that it's a good investment hunting ground. Yeah,
interesting. And Simon, your thoughts?
Not a great deal, other than to say Australia needs foreign capital. It's not like we are, loaded with enough of it ourselves. We need foreign capital, especially for residential supply. It's often the foreign capital that enables a developer to get over that initial hurdle to commence constructing. So we need it, but there's too many uncertainties with other countries and foreign borders and foreign policy for me to have an opinion beyond that. Sorry.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I think one more. I think this one's definitely for you, Simon. Have you got your crystal ball there?
Sure.
Okay. When would you buy an investment, and where would you buy?
Right. When? I'm going to say this, the same about when now as I would any other time. It is always a good time to invest. The most important question is never when, other than can you afford to. The most important question is always where. And I practice what I preach there. Where I live has nothing to do with where I invest. I live in Brisbane. I bought very, very few properties in Brisbane for several years. When I say me, not just me personally, my business, Propertyology, we've been buying all around the country and very little in Brisbane. As to where we should invest, rather than answer directly with a location, maybe I'll give people some tips. Think about the industries that have the most healthiest outlook and factor into that how each industry might have been affected by the coronavirus. And then pick locations that have those industries in their local economy, and make sure that you focus on the supply side of things. Tight supply is very important to have price growth.
Doug, do you want to have a go at that question too?
I'll share with you a Chinese proverb, if I may. Yeah, the
Yep.
best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So I have a sneaky feeling we'll all be looking back at this in 5-10 years' time and say, damn, I should have done it then. That was the perfect time, perfect opportunity. So, yeah, I mean, who knows what the future holds? But if your investment strategy is medium to long term, you're going to make money in bricks and mortar. So, yeah, I think for me, I don't see why you wouldn't be buying now, because, as I said, at the moment there's record low interest rates. Money is cheap, it's readily available, and there's some great opportunities. Clearly, I'm biased as to where, because of where my offices operate, of course. So I won't answer that part of the question.
Yeah. Well, we might wrap it up there. I mean, one last question for you, Doug. Where'd you get that amazing Zoom background?
Not a Zoom background.
It's not a Zoom background.
It's actually a wall mural.
Oh, right.
Lakes in Croatia. So my colleague, she's of Croatian heritage, and I let her choose the wall mural. So that's what it is. So what I can assure you is I'd much rather be there at the moment than sat in front of a painting on a wall. But alas, that's not possible, of course.
It does look beautiful, and I hear Zoom backgrounds are a growing enterprise right now. So, you know, if there was a pivot to be had, I reckon Zoom is like a star. Anything to do with that.
Yeah, no, that's the well, I sort of say it's a real deal. It's not, but it's a permanent fixture. So. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, Simon, where can people connect with you if they want to connect with you post webinar? Like we'll put the replay up on eliteagent.com/COVID-19, but where can people connect with you?
Oh, thank you for that, Sam. Propertyology.com.au. In the menu tab across the top of the of your browser is an option to subscribe to our newsletter, which is never us promoting ourselves sales-based. It's research-based articles that either once a week to once a fortnight we'll release 1 or 2 articles, and that is commentary all over Australia. So that's probably the best way to get in touch with us.
Yeah, and good commentary too, I can say that. And Doug, where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Probably by email. So just douglas@starrpartners.com.au. So just reach out anytime. Always happy to help where I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thank you guys very much for joining us for this hour of Lunch and Learn. Is there any last pieces of advice or anything that you'd like people listening to remember?
No, I guess only just to repeat what I said earlier in regards to, are you market driven or marketing driven? You can somewhat be the architect of your own destiny. So just knuckle down and just get on with it. It is, I hate to use the expression, but it is what it is. Things will change, but as I said, there's very little control you have over that. So just take each day as it comes. You reach out and connect with as many people as possible. And obviously when we pass through this, it will be those people that will benefit and win the best. Yeah.
And Simon, any last thoughts from you?
I think for everyone today, real estate professionals are regarded as leaders within the community, and I would encourage everyone listening to this to really think about how can you be a leader. I agree with what Doug said, be positive, build those relationships, set the right example in regards to the health protocols, set the right example, make sure you're doing that, politely pick someone else up who's not doing that, and set the tone. Sentiment is a contagious thing. So if you're negative, how could you expect your community to be negative? But guess what? It's incredibly powerful the other way around. If you're very positive and calming with the people you're connected with, it will flow off onto them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Guys, thank you so much for joining in. And to everyone on the webinar, thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you same bat time, same bat channel next week. Bye for now.
Sam. Thanks, Doug.
See ya.